You know, when someone in the family gets an Alzheimer's diagnosis, it's almost impossible not to ask that one heavy question. Is this in my future too? It's a worry that's tied right into our DNA, and today we're going to untangle some of those genetic links to get some real clarity. Let's get right into it.
And this is the question, right? It's the one that keeps people up at night. If you've watched a parent, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle go through this, you just can't help but wonder if that same story is already written in your own genes. It's a totally understandable and honestly a pretty scary thought.
Well, the short answer is, it's just not that simple. It's definitely not a straightforward yes or no. While your genes absolutely play a part, your family history doesn't automatically seal your fate. The reality is way more complex, and it all starts with understanding that there are two very different ways your genetics can be involved here.
So to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to take a closer look at the DNA itself. Because, and this is important, when it comes to Alzheimer's, not all genetic connections are created equal, not by a long shot.
Okay, this right here is probably the single most important concept we're going to talk about. You have to get this distinction. We're talking about two totally different categories. First, there are risk genes, which just increase your chances, and then there are deterministic genes, which are incredibly rare and pretty much directly cause the disease.
So let's break down what that really means. Seriously, understanding the difference between a gene that just adds a little risk versus one that actually causes the disease is the absolute key to seeing the whole picture clearly. So on one side, you have these risk genes. Think of them as just upping the odds. They increase your likelihood, but, and listen to this, they're absolutely not a guarantee you'll get it. And these are the more common ones. On the other side of the coin, you have deterministic genes. These guys directly cause it. If you have one, it's highly likely you'll develop the disease. But, and this is the part you really need to hear, these genes are extremely, extremely rare.
I love this analogy because it makes it so clear. A risk gene? That's like having a family history of not being a great swimmer. It's a heads up, right? Something to be aware of, something you can manage. But a deterministic gene? That's like being shoved right into the deep end of the pool. It's a direct event, not just a possibility you need to think about. All right, so now that we've got the two categories straight, let's put some names to faces. Who are these actual genes? What are the specific players in our DNA that scientists are really focused on?
The biggest one, the most well-known and significant risk gene, and I'm going to say risk again for emphasis, is called APOE4. If you've ever done any reading on this, this is the gene you've probably heard about. So just how common is this thing? Well, about 15 to 25% of people have at least one copy of it. Now that's not nothing, but let's flip it around. That means the vast majority of people, somewhere around 75 to 85% of us, do not carry this specific risk gene. But this is where the context is just everything. Having APOE4 is like putting a thumb on the scale. It adds some weight, but it doesn't decide the outcome. Plenty of people with this gene live their whole lives and never develop Alzheimer's. Now, if you get a copy from both parents, that does increase the risk more, but even then, it is still not a sure thing. And what's really fascinating is that there's another version, called APOE2, that seems to do the opposite. It might actually give you a little bit of protection. Okay, let's totally switch gears now. We've talked about the common risk gene. Let's move over to that second, much, much rarer category. Those genes that are truly deterministic, the ones that are like being pushed in the pool. So far, researchers have found 3 of them. They're called APP, PSEN1, and PSEN2. If you inherit one of these, it makes developing Alzheimer's almost a certainty.
So what are these genes actually doing that's so different? Well, unlike a risk gene, these guys have a very direct and faulty biological job. They basically kick the brain's production of a toxic protein called amyloid beta into overdrive. This protein then clumps up, damages, and kills nerve cells, which leads directly to the disease.
But before any alarm bells start ringing in your head, I want you to look at this number. This right here might be the single most reassuring statistic we talk about today. These deterministic genes, they are responsible for less than 1% of all Alzheimer's cases. Let me say that again. Less than 1%. And they're almost entirely found in families with the extremely rare early onset form of the disease.
So, if those deterministic genes are that rare, and the risk genes aren't a guarantee, what else is going on? Well, it's time to pull the camera back and look at the bigger picture. Because genetics, they're only one piece of a much larger and more complicated puzzle.
So what else is in that puzzle? Well, age is still the single biggest risk factor, period. But look at this other stuff. Things like the health of your heart and blood vessels, your lifestyle, we're talking exercise, smoking, sleep, even a history of a bad head injury. All of these play a major role. And notice, family history is just one line on a much longer list, a list that includes a lot of things we actually have some control over.
And that brings us to the most practical part of this whole thing. With all this information, what are the actual takeaways? How do we turn all this science into something we can actually use? It's really easy to feel kind of powerless when you talk about genetics. I mean, it can feel like it's completely out of your hands. But the real power comes from understanding this full picture of risk and knowing what your next steps can be. So if you're feeling concerned, either for yourself or for someone you love, here are 3 really solid, concrete steps. 1. Start a journal. Write down any symptoms you're seeing so your doctor can spot patterns. 2. Make a list of every single medication being taken to rule out any weird side effects. And 3. Before you even think about genetic testing, have a real, serious conversation with a doctor or a genetic counselor about what those results could mean for you and for your family, not just medically, but emotionally too.
And that last point is just so important. A genetic test is not like a simple blood test for cholesterol. The result carries a ton of emotional weight. It is a deeply personal choice, and it's one you should only make when you fully understand what the potential fallout could be.
And that really brings us right to our final thought. Our DNA might lay out a blueprint, but it does not write the final chapter of the book. By understanding the true, nuanced role that genes play and recognizing the power that things like lifestyle have, we can shift our focus to the things we can influence. Your genes are a part of your story, for sure, but they are not your destiny.